Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for answering. Sometimes people don't answer. Appreciate it. Thank you all very much to the sponsors and the organizers for the opportunity to come visit with you about soil health. It's a topic of which I'm very passionate on, so it's really exciting for me to be able to espouse that passion just a little bit. So in doing so, I also want to introduce you to the Soil Health Institute because it's a new entity, a new 501c3 a nonprofit organization who now has its roots here in RTP. So just to kind of level set a little bit first, when we talk about soil health, we're talking about the capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And so a couple of key words here. When we talk about these functions, we're talking about things like providing water, providing nutrients. Other key words there are the vital living ecosystem. We've really gone a long way towards raising enough food for generally the world population by focusing on the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, lime, those chemical requirements, and somewhat in the physical aspects. But this is also kind of a refocus of not just recognizing the chemical and physical attributes of soils that help contribute to the status of its health, but also that biological, that living component. There are a number of imperatives while it's extremely important while we focus on soil health. One of them, of course, is the world population. Right now, around 7.3 billion people. We're going to have to soon feed over 9 billion people just by the year 2050. Another imperative, increasing temperature. Over the last 1,000 years, you can look at ice core data, tree ring data, coral reef data, that have shown that the last 10 or 15 years have been the warmest on record over that 1,000-year period. And this has gotten everyone really excited, and for good reason. But our models are telling us that this is what's coming over the next 83 or so years. Think of what that increased temperature is going to mean to increased evaporative demand, what that's going to mean to wildlife habitat, fish habitat, our demand for water, for growing our food for this burgeoning population. Models are telling us that just by the middle of this century, from that 30-year period between 2036 and 2065, many parts of the United States are going to be experiencing an additional 18 months of drought. So think of what that is going to be meaning for, again, our ability to grow this food and impact on our other natural resources and the demands for water. At the same time, the finger is being increasingly pointed towards agriculture as being a source of nutrients and sediments into our waters. This is a recent report by EPA, came out in January of 16, saying that only 78%, or I should say 78% of our nation's rivers and streams are in only fair to poor biological condition. Only about 20% in good condition. Now, the good news is that there's a lot of good opportunities. This is one of those rare win-win situations where what's good for the farmer is also good for the environment by focusing on soil health. This is one of those opportunities. I put farmers first here because it's important to realize that farmers are the ones that are managing some 70% of the lands in the United States. So it's the individual decisions that they make on a daily basis for how they manage that land that's going to influence our soils, our air, our water quality, all these natural resources. And increasingly, farmers are more and more innovative. They're trying new cover crops, like this is something they call a tillage radish, where they are not harvesting it, but they're just growing it as a cover crop to grow and die. And what that radish does is it burrows down and it breaks up these hard pans in the soil. And think of not just the carbon now that's being deposited above the surface, but that carbon now that's being deposited at depth. And this is why that's important. This is another one of those kind of fundamental opportunities here, is this relationship right here. The relationship between soil organic carbon and the available water holding capacity. So there's a couple of points that you can measure in the laboratory. One's called permanent wilting point, or PWP, with those red dots there. Another one's called field capacity. And the difference in those, when you measure those and calculate their difference, that's what we call the available water holding capacity. That storage in the soil that is available to plants. Now you can see that it fans out. That available water holding capacity increases when you increase the soil organic carbon. It depends on the soils, it depends on the assumptions you make when you make these calculations, But by my calculations, when you increase the soil organic carbon content by 1%, you're increasing that soil's ability to hold plant available water by anywhere from 2,500 gallons per acre to 12,000 gallons per acre. So now think of the resilience that you can build into your food production system by increasing the soil organic carbon, which is the best way we really use for measuring soil organic matter. You know, what imparts that dark color to soil. And so this is one of those huge opportunities for soil health. Soil health is many things, but real central to it is increasing that organic matter. And this is one of those reasons. Now, what we have is we have a number of practices that are telling us that research in this peer-reviewed scientific literature shows us that we know we can increase soil organic matter, soil organic carbon. One of those key practices is no tillage. So in no tillage, you're not tilling the soil, you're leaving the residue on the surface. That residue decomposes, goes through a process called humification, where that residue, like the leaves and stems and stalks, actually becomes part of that soil humus, that soil organic carbon. And research has shown us, here's 4 different peer-reviewed studies over 4 different states, different periods of time, compared to conventional tillage, where you can increase that soil organic carbon. Now, the trick is, well, it depends on your temperature, depends on your moisture, depends on the chemical composition of that residue, depends on many different things, different soils' capacities to increase that carbon. But what we feel like that our opportunity is in soil health is to take that knowledge, take existing models, and really operationalize it. And I'll get into that just a little bit more. Another real key practice for enhancing soil health is using cover crops. So in that situation, where you're not growing the crop like during the main part of the growing season, like during the fall and winter, you plant something that helps maintain the soil, helps protect the soil, basically helps feed the microorganisms because they're really feeding on the residue and the root exudates and those things. And then you plant directly into it. And so now that next year you have a mulch that you see right here. So you have this mulch that now helps shade the soil, control weeds, helps moisture being retained. And a lot of it has what's called allelopathic properties, where there are different compounds in that material that will help control certain soil-borne disease organisms, pathogens, also weeds also. And don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of this. But my point is that there's also a lot of peer-reviewed literature that tells us there's tremendous environmental benefits of not just no-till, but of cover crops. I'm just going to take you through the top example. This is one study in the peer-reviewed scientific literature from Alabama, where they had conventional tillage cotton without a cover crop. They were losing approximately 2,000 pounds of soil per acre per year. Sorry for the U.S. units, but when I talk with the farmers, they like to see pounds per acre instead of megagrams per hectare. Here's the nitrate loss, the soluble phosphorus loss, and then when they compare that to the no-till cotton, now they're lost about half the amount of soil, also about half the amount of nitrate, phosphorus. Then now when they add a winter wheat cover crop to that no-till cotton system, now they're losing only about 1/10 of the soil that they were initially losing. Same, they've significantly reduced the amount of nitrate and phosphorus loss. And so all these are examples, again, in the literature that tells us we have that win-win situation at hand here. When we use these types of practices to enhance soil health, it's not only good for productivity, but it's also good for the environment. So this brings us to our mission, is to safeguard and enhance that vitality and productivity of soil through scientific research and advancement. And here I will highlight the word productivity, because we realize that farmers and ranchers are businessmen and women at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And we need to conduct work that's economically viable for them. And productivity is that key part too. So we have a number of different roles. One of them is for really kind of building those research and those corresponding implementation strategies and those networks in order to put them into play. Identifying what gaps, like the research gaps that are there, and then basically be a fundraiser. That's one of my chief jobs now, is also to be a fundraiser, to help bring in funding to address those gaps. But the beauty of doing that for us is that we were stood up by the Noble Foundation, which is out of Oklahoma. And so they made a $20 million 10-year commitment to us. And so what that allows us to do is stay true to our vision and our mission to enhance soil health and not run askew, basically following where the dollars come from. Because the dollars that we bring in for this, now we can get out strategically to advance soil health. So then that's part of what we do now is administer that accountable, transparent grants program, ensuring the impact of the investments, but also follow up with getting educational materials out there and the tech transfer out there. So as any good business, one of the things we've done is now developed an action plan, and this is not something that we've done behind closed doors. Over some 3 years through an effort called the Soil Renaissance, a lot of the research priorities and other priorities, education, communications priorities, for example, have also bubbled up, and we've incorporated them into our action plan. So I'm just going to step you through some of the kind of the key areas. One of them is a major goal in research for enhancing productivity and resilience through soil health. So for each of these, we've identified particular priorities, and for each of those priorities, we've identified a number of actionable steps. Reading our action plan is very different than reading a strategic plan. It's not a 2 or 3 page kind of glossy general document that's really for external audiences. It's really a very detailed document, some 34 pages long, that identifies what the gaps are, what the specific actionable steps are to address those gaps. So just for example, enhancing productivity through soil health, we've identified priorities increasing available water holding capacity, like I showed you that graph of, increasing infiltration rate, developing disease suppressive soils, enhancing nutrient availability through soil health. And so kind of backing up again to that one about enhancing water holding capacity. Yeah, I showed you those relationships between organic carbon and available water holding capacity, but it kind of goes beyond that because different soils have those different relationships. So now we need to determine which soils can be generalized and lumped together, which ones behave differently, and which ones behave in a similar manner. Now for those that behave in that similar manner, we need to then determine what is the attainable levels of soil organic carbon. Different soils have different equilibrium relationships and they different attainable levels, so we need to determine that for the major soils. And then we need to take some of the existing models of decomposition, humification, in other words, our ability to increase that soil organic carbon, and now we need to employ them and develop them in decision support tools. Because now what we really want to do is just not have scientists be able to model it, but we want to be able to have farmers and consultants to be able to operationalize this information, this knowledge. And so that's one of our steps in our action plan. I just kind of led you through about 3 or 4 of those steps to eventually get to a point where we calculate our attainable levels of soil organic carbon, then we take our models and put them in decision support tools that we can get in the hands of farmers and ranchers to really operationalize it. And think of what that would do. That would now give them the ability to basically build a production system, crop rotations, tillage practices, cover crops, those types of systems to achieve a targeted level of resilience to drought by a targeted level of increase in available water holding capacity. Think of the power that that would have towards driving that adoption of these practices that, guess what, we would all benefit from because it benefits water quality. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It increases carbon sequestration. It helps provide pollinator habitat through a lot of these crops too. One of the things we're wanting to do with our measurements and standards evaluations is to develop and evaluate existing assessments around the country. Like every state has a state bird, a state tree, a state flower, they also have a state soil. And so we're looking at using those state soils as a first place to evaluate these across a range of conditions. We're also looking at economics because this is, again, a key driver for influencing adoption. Not just looking at potential profitability, but also that risk reduction attribute, that economic risk reduction. Think if we build in resilience to things like drought, then it should make sense that we therefore should reduce that economic risk that grower is making in his or her investments in the land. I want to look at a number of different approaches to monetization of soil health, increase communication on the impacts. This is not just for farmers and ranchers, but also to the public. We eventually want to get to a point where we're also helping the markets drive the adoption of these soil health practices, because it's also good for the environment. And also, of course, making sure that our policies are well grounded and well informed, so that at a minimum they're not detrimental to soil health, but hopefully that we can also influence them to the point where they're really positive, beneficial for soil health. Just a couple of more points that I want to make is that there's so much interest in soil health these days. We've realized that we kind of are at the cusp of doing some good things, but we don't want to work against one another. We want to be really well coordinated. So we really recently brought in 10 different organizations that have active soil health activities going on, and to develop kind of a strategy, of a 2-day workshop to develop a strategy how we can really coordinate these. And these are mostly national and regional organizations. And then the last thing that I would kind of leave you with is an opportunity that we really, we've posted in January on our website. It's something called the Soil Health Research Landscape Tool. It currently has just over 1,000 references in it. Our goal is to add 1,000 per year for the next couple of years, assuming that they're out there. And this allows folks to go on and search for any, by keyword or by some problem they're having in the soil, for example, organic matter depletion, and then they can focus right in on their geographic region or their production system, so they can focus right down to the individual research reports specific to their situation or in their region or in their cropping system. And so I encourage all of you to check that out and see if it can be helpful to you. I would also ask if any of this interests you, or even if it doesn't, if it does interest you, please log on to our Institute website and sign up to receive email updates. We send out a quarterly newsletter, so it's not like every day or every week. We're not going to blow you away with these things, but we do have quarterly newsletters now going out, and when you get signed up that way, you can be assured of becoming aware of research grant opportunities, other types of things, meetings that are going on in the soil health world. So thank you very much for your attention.